Welcome, learners, to another deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a really expansive and fascinating journey looking at the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Mhm.
We've got these incredibly rich sources, excerpts from a novel that just plunge us into the very beginnings of psychiatry as we might recognize it, the complexities of human relationships, and even the nature of consciousness itself.
Indeed. And our mission today really is to trace how the scientific understanding of the mind started to evolve. We'll look at the, frankly, often harrowing realities for people with mental illness back then,
Right.
and also explore those profound personal and, philosophical questions that popped up alongside these new discoveries. It's quite a story, ambition, compassion, that relentless human drive to understand.
We'll be focusing on the lives of a few key people, doctors, patients, their families, whose experiences really shine a light on this pivotal time in medicine and, well, human thought. So get ready, because we're about to unpack some truly thought-provoking stuff. Okay, let's start by setting the scene. The grim reality of mental illness in the late 1800s. Our sources introduce us to Olivier, a young man whose condition is described in pretty striking detail.
Yeah.
He's living in a stable, apparently his hair uncut for more than a year, his dark beard reaching almost to his chest. The writing paints this incredibly vivid picture of isolation, even cohabiting with a horse and chickens shitting on him from the rafters.
Wow.
It's
Oh.
it's visceral.
It really is. And what's immediately striking is that stark portrayal of the asylums. One character describes them quite chillingly as places where you feel the absence of God. It just emphasizes the squalor, the despair.
Wow.
We hear about patients lying in his own excrement, this feeling of stepping into a different existence entirely when you went inside. It's a powerful indictment, really, of a system offering little more than containment.
So clearly not places of healing, not remotely.
Yeah.
But despite that grim picture, there were early attempts at reform, weren't there? People trying to bring some kind of humanity into it?
Oh, absolutely. The sources do highlight some significant shifts. There was the moral treatment, championed by figures like Samuel Tuke, who set up the York Retreat.
Okay.
And this was, revolutionary.
Uh,
Not just because it emphasized kindness and a firm hand, but it fundamentally challenged the idea that mental illness was untreatable. It was about seeing patients as individuals capable of recovery, giving them tasks, a supportive environment.
that sounds crucial.
And another key figure, Mr. Connolly, advocated strongly for never using mechanical restraints. That was a mission some asylum administrators, like this Dr. Favreau in the sources, really embraced.
That sounds incredibly forward-thinking for the time.
Yeah.
But given the sheer scale of the problem, I mean, so many people needing care, how effective could these individual efforts really be? Was it just a numbers game they couldn't win?
That hits on a critical challenge. How do you even begin to apply individual moral treatment, that kind of intensive care, when you're dealing with, as the source says, nigh on 2,000 patients?
Yeah, unimaginable.
Exactly. The sources really highlight the struggle of administrators like Favreau. He
Yeah.
knew the ideals, the stars by which to navigate, as it's put, but often felt like he was holed below the waterline by the sheer numbers and lack of resources. It really illustrates the immense difficulty of scaling compassionate, individualized care in what was often a broken system.
Right. So against this backdrop, this often despairing reality, we have these two young doctors, Thomas Midwinter and Jacques Ribier. They decide to forge a different path entirely.
Mm-hmm.
They set up their own private clinic, the Schloss Sieblick Sanatorium, in Austria-Hungary. What was their vision? How is it fundamentally different from those asylums?
Well, their vision was indeed revolutionary for its time. A complete contrast, really. They wanted to create a genuine healing environment. The focus was on rest and quiet, tender nursing, and douceur de vivre, that sweetness of life.
A sweetness of life. I like that.
Yeah, creating an atmosphere that was deliberately therapeutic, pleasant. It was sort of akin to what Pinel's influential student, Jean-Étienne Esquirol, had achieved at Charenton, which was known for more humane care. And the location itself, picturesque, gardens, lakeview, mountains, was all part of the design meant to foster recovery.
And the building itself, the Schloss, it wasn't just any old place, right? It was an old abbey.
Yes, exactly. A very large establishment could seat 60, and they planned for up to 50 patients eventually. Thomas saw it as a clinic for people with nervous disorders, one that needed to be flexible.
Great.
They converted cellars into labs, hired staff including this prize-winning student, Franz Bernthaler, and even brought in a former patient, Daisy, to help out. Sonia, who was Thomas's sister and Jacques' wife, took charge of the domestic side, the finances. She oversaw sumptuous cooking, apparently, and a pretty rigorous rest-cure diet. including raw beef soup.
Raw beef soup. Wow, okay. That certainly makes you appreciate modern dietary approaches.
Doesn't it just, you can only imagine the dedication or maybe desperation of those patients.
Right, but it sounds like a much more holistic approach. Overall comfort, care.
Yeah.
And they also had this strong ambition to conduct serious scientific research there, too, not just treat wealthy patients.
Precisely. That was key. While they did serve rich ladies, as the text says, who could pay more for rooms with better views, which kept the place afloat financially.
Sure, practicalities.
Exactly. But they also aimed to take on free cases from the asylums, specifically for scientific study. They believed that among the poor, they might actually find more interesting cases from a research perspective. This dual purpose, combining compassionate care with rigorous scientific advancement, was absolutely central to their whole venture. Really quite groundbreaking.
So, with Schloss Seeblick up and running, Thomas and Jacques weren't just, changing patient care. They were diving headfirst into that huge question of the era. What actually causes mental illness? Our sources show this really dynamic intellectual landscape back then, lots of different theories competing. What were some of the big ideas floating around?
It was a really pivotal time, and you see this clear divide emerging in how mental illness was understood. On one side, you had figures like Wilhelm Griesinger. He insisted that lunatics suffered from a disease of the body and nerve and brain.
Purely physical.
Yes. He advocated for psychiatry to become just another part of medicine, like cardiology or neurology. His battle cry, as the source calls it, was that psychiatry had to emerge from its hermetic life as a kind of guild, and embrace a more scientific biological foundation.
Okay, so the biological camp. But then there was this hugely influential school focusing more on mental or emotional causes, right? Especially with conditions like hysteria, which seems so widespread then.
Indeed. Professor Charcot at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris, they called him the Napoleon of medical sciences. He became incredibly famous for using hypnotism to demonstrate the nature of hysteria. He claimed only hysterics can be hypnotized.
Really? Only hysterics?
That was his view, that it was a distinct neurological thing. But then another influential hypnotist, Bernheim, had this direct and noisy contention, as the text puts it, with Charcot's view. Bernheim believed hypnotism was much more broadly applicable, linked more to suggestion and psychological states, not some specific underlying pathology.
Okay, so a real debate there. And Jacques, one of our doctors, was initially very much in Charcot's camp, right? Even though he later explored Bernheim and Genet. But then comes this pivotal moment with a patient, Katharina. This is where it gets really interesting. What happened with her? How did she challenge these ideas?
Right, Katharina. She presented with a whole range of physical symptoms. Abdominal pain, joint problems, low spirits, insomnia, even zoophobia, a fear of animals.
Quite a mix.
Yeah. And Jacques, trained in these prevailing theories, particularly Charcot's, diagnosed her with hysteria. He connected all her symptoms to psychological trauma specifically, grief and suppressed emotions around her father's death, and a relationship she'd had with a certain Herr P.
Okay, so a classic psychological explanation for the time.
Exactly. And he used hypnosis and this process called catharsis, basically an emotional purging through talking it out as a form of talking cure, which was actually quite cutting edge then.
Fascinating. So Jacques is going down the psychological route, the talking cure. But Thomas, his partner, starts looking at Katharina's symptoms and thinks, maybe something else is going on.
That's the crucial turn. Thomas, who was getting more interested in pathology, inspired by people like Franz Nissl and Alois Alzheimer, the pioneers studying brain cells, the cell layers of the cerebral cortex, early forms of dementia.
Right, the groundwork for understanding Alzheimer's disease later.
Yeah, precisely. Thomas looked at Katharina's case from a different angle, a more physical one, and he discovered she actually had acute appendicitis and rheumatic fever, both completely organic physical illnesses.
Wow. So not hysteria at all.
Not at all. And Katharina's misdiagnosis wasn't just, a clinical oops, it was a real watershed moment. It starkly exposed the danger of a theory that is too rigid, as Thomas puts it. Neglecting basic physical examination because you're so focused on the psychological theory could have deadly consequences. It really forced a reevaluation.
Absolutely. It underscores that importance of just checking the simple things, fever, sore throats, and so on, as the text says.
Exactly.
So that diagnostic breakthrough for Katharina must have been huge, not just for her, obviously, but for the sanatorium's future, and for Thomas's and Jacques' own understanding of their work. How did it affect their scientific direction?
Oh, it was a truly crucial turning point. Jacques apparently felt the weight of his single clinical error quite deeply. But Thomas, while acknowledging that, emphasized the broader point: the dangers to the patient of a theory that is too rigid. He even noted that diagnosing hysteria was a fair deduction based on the common understanding then, but it was ultimately incomplete, dangerously so in this case.
Right, context matters, but the outcome was potentially fatal.
Precisely. And this whole incident spurred Thomas to dive even deeper into the physical basis of mental illness. He and Franz Bernthaler became these keen-eyed pathologists. They started noting abnormalities in the brains of patients with general paralysis of the insane, which we now know is caused by late-stage syphilis,
Right.
and also dementia precox, which is largely what we understand today as schizophrenia.
Yeah.
This was a critical step, looking for those biological markers.
So they're literally looking inside the brain for answers, connecting specific damage or abnormalities to specific conditions. And it's around this time that Thomas, fueled by these findings, starts developing this really, audacious theory connecting psychosis itself to human evolution. Tell us about that.
Yes, it's quite profound. Connecting these specific findings to the bigger picture, Thomas develops this theory heavily influenced by Darwin. He starts arguing that psychosis is a human condition, as human as the straight toe or the arched foot.
As fundamental as our physical traits.
That's his argument. He posits that way back at the crucial chemical moment when the mutation occurred that led to the first Homo sapiens, some kind of instability came into the neuronal circuits of the brain.
An inherent instability from the very beginning.
Yes. And he believes this inherent vulnerability, while obviously causing immense suffering, might also confer advantages. Things like superior brain power, language, creative ability, even what he calls divine dissatisfaction, that restless human spirit.
So the price of being human, in a way.
In essence, yeah. For Thomas, you cannot have humanity without psychosis. They are indivisible. It's a staggering idea.
It really is. A bold claim linking our unique human capacities directly to this vulnerability. It definitely makes you rethink normal.
Did the sources suggest how this radical idea was received? Was it just his personal theory, or did it get much traction?
The novel suggests it was very much Thomas's personal evolving theory at this stage, not something widely accepted in the medical community then. It underscores just how ahead of its time, or perhaps outside the mainstream, his thinking was becoming.
Okay.
And this deeper, more complex understanding of the mind seems to fuel their next big move. Their lease at Schloss Seeblick is ending, and that becomes the catalyst to seek somewhere new, somewhere even grander. Wilhelmskogel, this mountain perch.
And it wasn't just about finding a new building, was it? There was a symbolic ambition there, too, involving a railway.
Exactly. Inspired by the Mount Lowe Railway out in California, Jacques actually travels there to investigate it. They plan to build a funicular, a mountain railway, to get patients and supplies up to Wilhelmskogel.
Wow.
It's not just practical. It really symbolizes their ambition to, physically and metaphorically lift the whole practice of mental health care to new heights, creating this unparalleled environment for both treatment and research.
A literal and figurative elevation.
Precisely.
And finally, amidst all these grand scientific ambitions and the day-to-day realities of running the clinic, we see the ripple effects on the next generation, specifically Daniel, Jacques, and Sonia's son. His experiences during World War I offer such a stark contrast.
Yeah, Daniel's wartime journey is a really poignant counterpoint. He grows up surrounded by patients, by lunatics, as the text says, whose oddity of their behavior he just thought nothing of. It was normal life for him.
Right.
Then he's thrown into the visceral horror of the trenches in Belgium and Italy. His reflections on life, death, the appalling strangeness of being entirely alone on the battlefield, his desire to place a much lower value on his life as a way to respect the dead. It's deeply moving.
It's such a different kind of trauma. Exactly. It's a stark reminder that while his parents and Thomas were striving to scientifically understand the mind, the world outside was busy creating new, profound psychological wounds on this massive, unprecedented scale.
So what does this all mean for us, looking back through these sources? This deep dive really reveals how that scientific quest to understand the human mind was so deeply intertwined with personal struggles, with historical upheaval.
Absolutely.
It shows that progress in medicine often comes not just from new theories, but from the courage to challenge the old ones, even when it means facing uncomfortable truths about our own nature.
And what's truly fascinating, I think, is how the source material leaves us reflecting on the very definition of being human. It suggests our struggles, Thomas's instabilities, might be inextricably linked to what makes us unique, our capacity for thought, language, creativity.
Yeah.
It really leaves you pondering whether the human mind in all its incredible complexity is both our greatest gift and perhaps our most profound burden.
It certainly makes you think. If the cost of being human includes this potential for mental suffering, as Thomas seems to suggest, what does that imply about our collective responsibility, our responsibility to those who bear that burden most heavily?
Mm-hmm.
And if consciousness is just a sixth sense, as Thomas describes it, how might future faculties, evolve capabilities beyond our current understanding, completely reshape our definition of reality, of purpose?
And that leaves us with a truly thought-provoking question for the future, doesn't it? If evolution continues, if new senses or faculties develop, what current mysteries of our reality might simply become, well, irrelevant to future generations? Just another understood aspect of biology, perhaps.
Something to definitely mull over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.